everybody. For this part right here in the Enchanted World series, we're going to go through the Secret Arts, one of the last books to come out. And as I said before, I'm not doing these in any particular order, so I'm just picking one here and we're going to give it a go. Start with beginning pictures here. This one has more interesting ones. You see what looks to be a wizard in front of his apprentice or servant there who has broken a bottle. Just a minute. Gotta flick through these. And yep, pretty self-explanatory. The last one being the pig merrily on its way. That gives you an idea what we're dealing with here. Let's see, and of course one of artwork, the power of the word. Yeah. Let's see what type of small captions we can find here. Ah, here we go. Little picture of Egyptian hieroglyphs. In art, the secret script of Egypt's priestly mages. For the scribes of ancient Egypt, a written word, whether it's set down on papyrus or etched in stone, was the gift from the gods. But hieroglyphs were more than abstract symbols. Each one embodied the very spirit of the object it represented. Eternal life could be gained, or an enemy's spirit destroyed, by the judicious use of these figures. The most powerful of all the hieroglyphs was the Ankh, a looped cross that symbolized life itself. A pharaoh anxious to protect himself after death from the ravages of grave robbers or the envy of ambitious relatives could ensure his soul's survival by instructing the painter of the tomb to depict him with the sacred Ankh, held beneath his nose, seated in the body's seat of the body's vital forces. So long as the image remained undisturbed, his spirit would live on, inhaling the very breath of life. Inside, we have one Egyptian gods, particularly Thoth. The ancient Egyptians revered the ibis-headed deity Thoth, inventor of the art of writing, who have recorded on scrolls all the secrets of the universe. A very unusual picture. We got a ship there with some deep, Egyptian divers. Let's just go with it. Learning that the Book of Thoth lay buried beneath the Nile, one intrepid seeker after truth used his magical prowess to create an army of mannequins who would labor in the watery depths. They searched until they unearthed a chest containing the precious text. So those aren't people; those are just mannequins, robots, so to speak. Here we go. A very interesting picture here. Having vanquished the serpents and scorpions that guarded the book, the scholar devoured the scrolls with his eyes. Instantly, he found he could see the immortal gods and understand the language of the beast. This is like something you have in a poster in your room, or it's on a heavy metal album cover. Inscriptions, in charge with occult forces. Odin, father and chief of the Norse gods, passed on his knowledge of magic and rune lore to poets, sorcerers, sages, and other especially favored mortals. The runes, in his gift, constituted an alphabet for writing, but they were far more than mere symbols. Initiates knew them as actual sources of power, tools, and weapons of wizardry. Those who understood the secrets of the runes knew the proper figures to inscribe on the sword, or to protect its owner in battle. Or which ones to carve on the tombstone to keep evil spirits at bay. The cunning of some rune masters runs so deep that their inscriptions could even control the dead, preventing a restless corpse from rising and wandering, or causing a hanged man to walk and speak. But men of such prodigious powers inspired more fear than admiration in Europe's dark ages of rival cults and warring tribes. Kings and priests looked upon them with suspicion. In some lands, the very possession of the tablet filled with wonder-working runes became a punishable crime. Adepts were burned to death, and their knowledge disappeared with them. In their remotest regions, their carved stones survive as objects of mystery and menace. But the real power of the runes was lost forever. We got a man opening a lock to a very big book. The priests of Brittany in bygone days took charge of certain books of fiendish character, wherein were recorded the manners of summoning devils. The books were prone to run amok unless suspended by a chain and secured with a stout padlock. Now here we got, this has always been interesting, a hoary charm from Magic's Morning. And what it is the very top here, it says abracadabra, but it goes down one line, missing one letter from the end till it gets to the first letter. And here's what it says. Healers traveling with the Roman legions used the ancient Hebrew name of power, abracadabra, to summon a fever-conquering spell. The letters were arranged in an inverted triangle, beginning with the whole word and ending with a single letter. The word was begun anew on every line, each time losing the last of its letters until only one A remained. A fever was supposed to, imitate the decreasing number of letters by gradually waning away. To effect the cure, the physician set the spell written on parchment around the invalid's neck for 9 days, and in the end of that time, it is removed and flung over the victim's shoulder into the eastward flowing stream. The rushing waters drew the heat of the infection away from the patient and back to the rising sun, source of all warmth, thus completing the treatment. Here we go, back to the big giant book. A Breton farmer, unfortunate enough to possess one of the devilish books, strove to rid himself of its burden. But when he tried to drown it, it rose on the waves and pursued him shoreward. There's an interesting picture. You got this, appears to be a wizard with a book in front of him, and in front of him was 2 trolls with a lady encased in glass. With a whispered spell, a wise man of Iceland summoned a troll couple who had stolen a farmer's bride. They emerged from the earth carrying the young woman, still alive but shrunken and imprisoned in glass. We got this man was performing some interesting mystical work. A sure way to prevent swarming bees from leaving their hives was to throw sand at them, then to claim a spell that began, "Settle victorious women, sink down to earth. You must never fly wild in the woods, to the wood." A picture of an older man with a looks to be a piece of paper with writing on his cap there. A calligraphic cure for stomach pains. In the age when few could read, writing was deemed to possess uncanny powers. A written spell to overcome illness might work with more force than spoken magic, especially if the words remained in physical contact with the sufferer. The people of early England cherished a formula written against stomach ailments that bore vestiges of the languages of the ancients: Hebrew, Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. Tradition held that the charm had been brought down from heaven by an angel. The spell began with an incantation meaning, "Shout, the Lord is my shield," and ended with the cry, "Alleluia, Alleluia." In between came a babble of incoherent words that made neither sentences nor sense. When written on a long, narrow strip of parchment and bound around the sufferer's head, the age-old words were charged with power. The magical inscribed paper was said to cure the patient promptly. Next chapter, Decoding Destiny. To a skilled practitioner, the undulations of a plume of smoke conveyed hidden truths of things to come. Picture of some palmistry. Revelations writ in the flesh. Would a life be long and healthy? Would a lover be constant till death? Would fortune favor a new enterprise? The cunning chiromancer could find the answers to all such questions and many more. After brooding over an open hand and tracing the linea vitae, linea cordis, linea fortuna, and the lines of life, heart, and fate, and other markings that formed the patterns of the palm, both hands had to be studied, for the left told the original destiny, while the right revealed an individual's reactions to his fate. The reading of his hands was an art of, as old as civilization itself. The ancient some Egyptians concealed a treatise on the subject in one of their pyramids. And it was said that sages recognized Buddha as their long-promised prophet at the moment of birth from the contemplations of the markings of the infant's hand, as well as those of the soles of his tiny feet. Oh, a wonderful Gustav Doré picture. Wreathed in trance-inducing vapors and intended by sacred serpents, the oracles of ancient Greece delivered messages from the gods. Warnings, promises, and prophecies were freely given, but cloaked in phrases of a tantalizing ambiguity. It's a picture of a bird of prey carrying a goose over a desert littered with other geese. Penelope, wife of the long-absent Odysseus, dreamed of a predator slaughtering her geese. A stranger interpreted vision as a premonition of her husband's return, when he would slay the fortune-hunting suitors who assailed her. Some cards. A deck of cards embodied destiny. The hand a player drew could imitate disaster, joy, or death. Here's one. 13 was always a number of ill omen. An evil reputation found vivid illustrations in a tarot deck whose 13th card represented a grim reaper, death. Interesting border around these two pages. A little 3x3 square, like one part of a Sudoku thing. An arithmetical talisman. Wizards learned to make numbers work for them in the most ingenious ways. One of the most remarkable was the diagram shown as a magic square, a chessboard-like arrangement of numbers selected so that every row of each diagonal in the grid added up to the same sum. Accordingly to the number of numerology, each number could be used only once, and a true magic square had to include every consecutive number from 1 until the square was filled. Creation of the squares could be a laborious process, far beyond the skill or patience of ordinary mortals. But for the adept, the result was well worthwhile. Magic squares had healing and talismanic powers, which varied according to the arrangement of numbers. The small square shown above, in which each row and diagonal adds up to 15, was engraved on lead as an amulet. It helped ease the pains of childbirth and brought success in dealings with the mighty. But like any powerful prescription, it had to be handled with great care. If it was worn on days when astrologers predicted an unfavorable aspect of the planet Saturn, it would hinder productive work and sow the seeds of discord. Interesting. Mother of all triads. The number 3 was inextricably linked to the ancient Greek goddess Hecate, who possessed 3 incarnations, mare, dog, and lion, and 3 heads, to see in all directions. Hecate ruled over the triad of humans' existence, birth, life, and death, and the triple planes of the physical planet, the underworld, and the earth and the air. Her dominions also embraced, the tripartite temporal sphere of past, present, and future. It was believed that the goddess drew her power of enchantment from the moon with its 3 phases, new, full, and old. The triple reigns of power that she held over humanity, time, and space made her an indispensable ally to sorcerers who sought to work changes in the seemingly immutable physical world. Those brave enough to invoke her name and their spells were rewarded with a share of her uncanny powers. What's going on here? Ghostly replicas presaging doom. Woe to any mortal who met their own fetch. An identical image of themselves that foretold death. Just where the double came from, no one knew for sure. Some people believed that it was an immortal soul projected in bodily form. Others thought it entered the world at the moment of birth and passed away when the body died. Whatever the truth, it was known to congregate with others of its kind. At midnight on All Souls' Eve, the fetches of local people fated to die that year trooped into village village churches. Only the foolish ventured out to observe them at that hour, since they risked seeing themselves. If that happened, it would only commend their souls to heaven. A girl might swoon, a man might draw his sword, but nothing could protect the self-seer from the tomb. Seven, the esoteric number. That's what this one's supposed to represent. I don't know if I'm going to read this whole thing here. We'll read this one. This is a little picture of some tarot card-like, pictures of all the 7 sins. On the bottom, it says, 7 deadly sins medieval reprobates were warned, preyed upon humankind and imperiled souls. Of the 7 devils that tempted mortals to vice, Lucifer installed pride, Mammon avarice, and Beelzebub gluttony. But I guess that's one of the things. Again, you got 7 sins, and I guess all it talks about the all the ways that 7's incorporated into various mythologies. This is various examples here. On the top here, we'll go over these are Asian gods. And let me see, I'll just point it right here. 7 Japanese gods of good fortune brought serenity, longevity, wisdom, work, wealth, love, and the prowess of battle. The aspect of each bespoken in his qualities. The great belly of the god of serenity revealed his inner resources. The dome brown of the god of wisdom, his mental powers. Show the other side here. Let's go here. What's this rainbow about? Oh, let's see. The ancient Hebrews told that the rainbow was a heavenly weapon laid down on earth as a sign of a pact between God and mortals. The celestial bow encompassed the 7 colors of the spectrum: red and blue, yellow and green, blue, indigo, and violet. We got a interesting picture here. The ancient world counted 7 wonders: a temple, a pyramid, Babylon's hanging garden, a massive tomb, a lighthouse, a glorious statue of Zeus, and the Colossus, a great bronze figure standing 100 feet high, straddling the harbors at Rhodes. But this picture right here, let's see. A biblical look at Revelations warned of a beast rising out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns and 10 diadems upon its brow. The embodiment of evil and deceit, the 7-faced monster would struggle with the power of good for sway over the nations. And as I said before, if you have any question on where about the illustrations, let me know. I'll see if I can answer them for you because they're told in the back. Arcane harmonies. You got like a satyr on a pan flute. Got a picture right here. I got all these small illustrations here. Collusions of sweet sound and savagery. Let me go ahead and read that one. In the days when wolves roamed the forests of France, many tales were told of men who possessed a sinister rapport with the beast. Music, it was said, could charm them into submission, and every flautist was suspected of an evil association with the ravaging pack. Rumor held that some musicians were not true men at all, but were werewolves who, at the stroke of midnight, acquired the fangs and bristling pelts of their fawning confreres. Summoning his savage associates to the forest glade with a haunting note, a minstrel could charm them with the sound of his flute or bagpipes. Once the animal was spellbound, they became as obedient as dogs. If the sorcerer musician bore any man a grudge, he would murmur to the wolves and the whereabouts of the enemy's flocks. Their bloodlust aroused, the wolves and their leader would dance, howling around a blazing fire, then set off to wreak havoc. After such a night, the morning would discover a field strewn with the bloody carcasses of slain lambs and ewes. Meanwhile, the leader of the wolves walked among men, his crimes suspected but impossible to prove. And we got a very interesting picture. It looks like a Norse ship attacking a giant fish. Undeterred with sword thrusts, a giant pike rose from the frigid waters in a Finnish lake to menace a boatload of sages and heroes. A pike. This is getting to be related to a character that was first shown in Wizards and Witches. In fact, he's already mentioned in a text here, Vainamoinum. In fact, here he is. That pike they were attacking, he made something from it. Let's see. With an instrument wrought from the great pike's jaws, the wizard Vainamoinum played the world's sweetest music. All the creatures of the air, the flood, and the forest came in peace to hear the melody. I always like the little water spirit coming out of the, like that. Oh, we got a duck going underwater here. Stirred by his own music, Vainamoinum's tears cascaded into the lake. A bird dived at bottom to retrieve them, for they had metamorphosed into pearls. Oh, that's right, they have turned into pearls. Huh. Very interesting picture. It's got a little story on both sides. Let's see. The demon army put to flight. One musician skilled at taming malevolence with melody was Lady Pengerwick, an Eastern princess who had married to a great Cornish enchanter. Lord Pengerswick, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it. Pengerswick had wed her during their sojourn among the magicians of the Orient, with whom he had studied the mystical arts. When he returned to Cornwall, he was a master of all the magical science save one. He could not bend a song to his will and make it work enchantment for him. His bride possessed a very skill that her husband lacked. When Lord Pengerswick brought her to his castle in that cold, wet land so far from her home, she sang the songs of her childhood and accompanied herself with the harp's haunting harmonies. The words of her refrain were in a language not even her husband could understand. Her voice was low and sweet, yet seemed to fill every room in the castle. The servants paused in their work to listen, and mermaids gathered in the cove below to catch the melody. One night, while her strains floated through the castle, her husband resolved to put his prowess as a sorcerer to the test. With a potent incantation, he summoned the most unruly of evil spirits to visit him and bow to his magic. They emerged from an oblivion darker than Lord Pengerswick had ever imagined. Hissing and spitting sulphurously, the hellborn company materialized around a frightened man. They whirled about him until he too was whirling and staggering. He shouted charms to dispel them, but in vain. The demon's unleashed fury was more powerful than the spoken word. All seemed lost for the full-hearted wizard now. Above the demon's snarls and his own cries, he heard the music of his wife's harp. The demons heard it too, and their wild spinning slowed to the harp's gentle rhythm. The ordered harmony of her playing imposed itself on their chaos, lulling them into quietude. At last, she sent them into the thrall of her music out through the air and back into the night. Let's see. Bewitched by the enemy pipes of horns, a Greek army's warhorse began to dance, and they lost a battle for their masters. Got some monks going to a monastery carrying a coffin. The bells of medieval churches tolled not only to announce the death, but to keep at bay the evil spirits that swarmed around it and that departed. The witch's kitchen. Here we go. Waiting at a crossroads for a wizard who had thwarted her, the vengeful witch of Fradam chuckled and stirred a hellish brew. Let's see. Foiled by a stronger magic, the witch was condemned forever to ride the clouds and the waves, rising storms in her wake. I like it. This is one of those times where later in the books they took the text and sort of form it around the illustrations. They do it one more time in another book, or which I'll get to in time. Some plants here. Clover and cinquefoil, centaury and bistort all had their place in the garland of herbs and wildflowers used to ward off witches and evil spirits. we got by a gallows. Night roving hags wandered the highways in search of gibbets and their human burdens, for the flesh of hanged men was a sovereign ingredient in maleficent spells. A very interesting picture of a lady there by, putting her feet near the water with looks to be fairies all around her. Focus on this. Touching forbidden unguent into her eyes, the young girl discovered a hidden world of fairies beneath the surface of a garden spring. One of those odd type pictures of way exaggerated proportions. A lethal antidote to hostile spells. To cause of painful ills and wasting disease where invisible sufferers laid the blame on malevolent magic and sought the counsel of a friendly sorcerer. After diligent inquiry, it was on occasion divined that the patient's suffering was affected by machinations of a hostile witch, acting either from a simple malice or in revenge for a slight. As the cause was magical, so was the cure. The sorcerer filled a glazed stone drinking jar. A jug with a painted face, round belly, and a narrow neck was reckoned as an ideal receptacle, with a mixture of blood, hair, nail parings, and urine from the patient. Sometimes the practitioner would add pins, knotted threads, and the heart of a small animal. This foul concoction was brought slowly to a boil over the kitchen fire at dead of night, with the sorcerer chanting the Lord's prayers backwards, at first slowly, then faster, and as the liquid began to bubble and emit vile fumes. As the bubbles rose, in the brew, it was expected that the distant witch or warlock would be clutched by terrible cramps. If the sorcerer did not relent, the enemy was sure to die. Opening windows to a hidden world. I won't get into this story. I'm going to keep going here. Let's see. Interesting picture here. When an old bandit Dolbaz was invited to a ball, he was startled by the offer of the keys of the castle in which he was held. An ointment opened the eyes of Dolbaz's henchmen, revealing their companions to be bare trees and snarling howls. Picture's got a couple of people looking onto a castle above. Fleeing the trap that had been set for them, the two brigands turned to find the castle spinning like a top on a mountain summit. That'd be quite an image. Lapidary lore. Looks like art from India, or at least usually used for Indian settings in the series. Here we go. Harder than iron, stronger than stone, a jewel called Shamir was hidden from humankind, and only a moorhen knew its whereabouts. But King Solomon, master of magic, encased the bird's nestlings in glass until she brought forth the Shamir to set them free. Yeah, it's being kind of used to cut into the glass. Forbidden by priests to use base metals for cutting the stones of a temple, Solomon employed the shamir to hew building blocks and carve inscriptions. A chain of cosmic connections. I'll skip this one, just to keep going. It's all the names of the planets and the sun. Branches of pink calcareous coral gathered from the seabed deflected demons, soothed sickness, warded off nightmares, and averted the evil eye. It looks like a necklace here. Living liquid turned to stone. And I'll skip this one. There we go. A little more interesting. Of his 4 wives, none captivated Charlemagne so strong than the Lady Frustrata. When she died, a nobleman found the secret of her allure, a magic ring concealed on her person. To break the spell upon the monarch, the ring was cast into the lake, but Charlemagne, drawn by its power, resolved to build a palace on the shore and end his days there. Sage's Quest. Let's see. Is this very long? I think it could be. It's number of pages. Oh, it's about 6. I'll skip this one here. We'll just show off the art. Looks like a man. Looks like a not a pilgrim, but a man, talking to what looks like a wizard. Looks like inside a study. Just fascinating there. Mirror and medals. Mirrors and medals. I see this picture. I'm reminded of the Book of Swords. Was it Book of Swords by Fred Saberhagen? I never read that series, but I just know of it. Highly praised. Very interesting picture here. With the aid of a bath and a mirror, a fairground magician undertook to cure a stranger racked with a mysterious ailment. See a hand there, and right there is a mirror of 2 people, and it looks like a doll that's pinned up against the wall. The mirror showed the melody's cause. A faithless wife had conspired with an evil physician against the invalid. The 2 were even now working lethal magic on his effigy. Oh, using it into a voodoo doll. Okay, and I am kind of curious about this picture here. Let's go ahead and read this one. Trapped in the Enchanter's Web. The old lore had many stories of mirrors that were windows into different worlds, but out of Arthur's brain came a tale of one that served instead of as a barrier set between the ill-starred maiden and the real world. In the real world, she was forbidden to gaze upon. Chroniclers did not record who put the curse on the Lady of Shalott, nor why, or even she herself could not tell what punishment threatened if she fell afoul of her maledictor's bane. She knew only that she was condemned to live cloistered forever in a grey-walled island castle upstream from Camelot, and she could not leave her room nor even glance from her gabled window on the river fields below. Her only link to the to the outside world was a great mirror that hung upon the wall opposite the open casement. Before it stood a loom. She spent her days weaving an endless tapestry, capturing the fabric, the shadow images she received at second hand from the glass. In the slow rhythms of her sheltered days, the lady had almost found contentment. When one morning a vision appeared in a mirror that rudely broke the spell, it was the boldest of Arthur's knights, Sir Lancelot, riding to his liege lord's court. She glimpsed his noble steeds, the sun glinting from the knight's breastplate, and dark curls cascading from his plumed helm. It was the finest sight she had ever seen. Forgetting the curse that hung over her, she stepped into the window. Impulsively, she took out into the sunlight. At once the mirror shattered and the tapestry ripped asunder. With a despairing cry, she leaped back, but too late. She had brought down doom upon herself. Let's see, let's turn that over around here. Her refuge gone, she left the tower and wandered spellbound down to the river. Later that day, courtiers noticed a small boat floating rudderlessly under the balconies of Camelot, and it lay the white-robed body of the lady who had forsaken the pale world of mirror images for the cold embrace of death. An anvil with a severed head on it, or it looks like it anyway. Let's see. A Romani ritual to catch a thief. Among the gypsies, Romani. Among the gypsies, who were skilled in metalworking as they were wise in magic, the blacksmith's anvil was used in a ritual tool to detect thieves. The victims of the robbery would turn an anvil into the altar to hollow it with a lighted candle. A pile of salt and a piece of bread. Around the anvil, he would set utensils taken from every person who could have committed a crime. Then he would summon the suspects and urge the guilty one to confess. If no one came forward, he would then ask each individual to turn to kiss the anvil and strike it with a tool. Then all would join together in an oath calling them retribution. Driven by fears of the unmistakable supernatural vengeance, the wrongdoer was compelled, even amongst his will, to return the spoil and beg forgiveness. So it's a piece of bread, although it does have a face-like look to it, if you know. Sword and fire. Swords were the proudest of weapons and could have wills of their own. So one foolish Viking warrior found at the cost when he failed to treat a peerless blade with respect it warranted. A magician's arsenal. With this commentary here, a wizard prepared a wand of power by cutting a branch with a tree that had not yet fruited. To multiply the wand's magic, the blade hewed it had to be steeped in blood. This looks like something from a fantasy novel. Or a monstrous beast there, where you never see the eyes, you just see the nose down to the mouth. Let's see. Gilded by a white-clad stranger, a Welsh peasant saw the true face of the mistress who held him in thrall. A stroke of his benefactor's wand exposed the fair lady as a monstrous goblin in disguise. Treasures in the get around. The woodlands of the old world abounded with caches of treasures buried by long-dead sorcerers, thieves, and kings. Unknown or forgotten, the hiding place remained inviolate, but a quivering switch in the diviner's hand could reveal their whereabouts. And of course, you have a chamber with some gold, soldiers lying down. It looks like some guy with a sack going shh. In a subterranean cavern, 1,000 sleeping heroes guarded a heap of ancient gold. With the aid of the magicians, the cattle drover penetrated the sanctuary and helped himself to treasure. Defense against spiritual assault. I'm not sure. Let's go ahead and read it. In the dangerous times when demons lurked in the shadows by day and sought to enter immortal dwellings at night, people used what tools they could to shelter themselves and their loved ones from harm. And through thorough versing of the lore charms, the traditional antidotes to evil provided the best hopes of success. In case of supernatural assault, the weakest point of any home were the apertures, doors, windows, and especially the wide chimneys. Such inviting entrances needed constant protection. A simple wooden post carved with bands and crosses might be set up to guard the hearth against the incursions of witches. The color red was also effective against the malice. Bundles of twigs from the scarlet berried rowan was tied to to the cross with crimson threads to guard a door or window. Nature offered numerous such antidotes to evil. A chance-found stone with a hole worn through it brought back certain luck. For example, particularly in the finder, tied a key to the other. Key or some other iron object to it. Brilliant kingfisher feathers were also sought out, folded in fresh linen. They could keep the cloth safe from decay, even if they kept the owner safe from baleful magic. Other devices offered personal security against the evil eye, because an open palm was a sovereign remedy. On Midsummer's Eve, peasants searched out wild orchid roots that mimicked the shapes of an uncurled fist. When traveling, riders sought to assure their safe arrival by embellishing their horses' bridles with brightly polished brasses that reflected ill will back towards the sources. Crescent shapes were particularly favorite for this, bearing the forms of waxy moon. Their influence was especially benign. Now this, Skull of the Dead, circles adorned with occult symbols, formulas for devil raising, were the sorcerer's stock and trade, but even the most skilled adepts used these tools warily, for they knew themselves to be playing with cosmic fire. Very nice picture here. Let's see. So mighty a mage was King Solomon, he did not fear to put even the forces of nature on trial. When a widow complained of maltreatment, the monarch summoned all four winds to answer the charges. It's a picture of a pot with a bowl in it. Probably read the text in order to find out what that is. Okay. We'll go ahead and read the story. This is the last story of the book. The War Between Light and Darkness. As old as time and as implacable, the war between good and evil magic never ceased. In the earliest days, the hierophants of cults called upon their shadowy gods to outdo each other's miracles. Forever after, evil sorcerers tested their mettle against adepts who worked their wonders for the good of humankind. Jewish storytellers of Eastern Europe spoke of a sage named Rabbi Israel, who conducted rituals of strength against an emissary from hell. On a long journey, the rabbi and his disciples paused for a night at the end. On entering, they found it empty, although its tables were covered with embroidered cloth and set with goblets and silver platters, as if for a feast. Then they heard sobbing from the kitchen. There the innkeeper and his family sat weeping around a small but empty coffin. The host complained that the feast was to celebrate the birth of his son, but his wife had borne 2 boys before. Each one had died on the eve of the festivities. This time, he was ready for the worst. The tiny casket awaited its occupant. The rabbi mused while he ordered candles to be lit around the baby's cradle and a sack placed behind the head. He and 2 people settled down to watch. An hour after midnight, the candles wavered. A cat glided silently, toward the cradle, its presence betrayed only by 2 green eyes shimmering out in the gloom. With the sun hissed, the feline hunched his shanks and sprang, but at that very instant it met the rabbi's gaze. The cat froze in midair, then fell in open sack. Swiftly, the students pulled the drawstrings to imprison the creature. The rabbi, laughing softly, reached for a stick and belabored the cat with all of his might. At last, when his arms was tired, he opened the window and emptied the sack's shrieking contents into the night. The next day, the feast was held amid much rejoicing, but strangely, the lord of the manor, who was to have been the guest of honor, was absent, bearing a gift of festive cake. The rabbi inquired at the manor house, where he found the man lying in bed, bruised all over. The 2 recognized each other instantly. The Lord's eyes glowed green, hissing furiously. He challenged the rabbi to a test of supernatural strength. The next morning, a platform was raised in the nobleman's courtyard, and a huge surface erected. Seeing this, the rabbi smiled, summoned his students to him, and traced 2 concentric circles in the earth around him. His opponent fired a furnace and flung open the doors. A multitude of wild beasts leaped out, sprang at the rabbi, but could not pass the circles. Again, the Lord opened the doors. This time the sun dimmed. The air became dark, and the furnace spewed forth creatures of the night. Some bony and clad in rags, some plump and blind like huge maggots. They advanced on the circles, which wavered as if the earth quaked beneath. But the rabbi raised his hand and muttered prayers that caused the attackers to vanish. For 2 days and nights the battle raged on. Again and again the sorcerer opened his furnace doors. Each onslaught was more terrifying than the last. Even the dead was called back to their graves. But although the circles quivered so much as they threatened to break, the rabbi and his students remained safe. On the 3rd day the nobleman began to weaken, and he resolved to bring out his most powerful ally. He ordered his services to stoke the furnace until it could take no more. Then, when the flames were at their height, he walked into the fire and summoned the devil. The pair embraced, and such was the heat of their malevolence that the very grass about the rabbi's feet began to smolder. Replete with power, the sorcerer strode out of the furnace, seized a pig and from one of the villagers, and dashed it into the ground. Under his great gaze, its belly broke, and where its entrails split, the ground opened in its dark chasm. Out of crevice there arose an army of monstrous creatures, breathing fire, slithering and crawling. They rushed at the rabbi and burst through the outer circle. The sorcerer, the scorched earth cracked, and the inner circle started to crumble. But the rabbi called his pupils close and, raising his arm, began to utter words of piety and power, which, with each syllable, the creatures diminished, sinking back into the dirt from which they had risen, and earth closed, and all became still. Exhausted, the Lord fell on his knees by the useless furnace and begged to be destroyed, for he was beaten. The rabbi looked down at his adversary with contempt and replied, "I shall not destroy you." Then he ordered the broken man to kneel and raise his eyes to heaven. The Lord did as he bid, and a low groan escaped his lips as he saw two black specks in the sky. The specks grew larger and larger until at last they became visible as a pair of eagles. Swooping down, they sank their talons into the face of a kneeling sorcerer. As he screamed in terror, they worked their beaks deep into his eye sockets, plucked out his eyes, and disappeared into the sky. Satisfied with the punishment, the rabbi called his disciples to him, and the group continued in its travels once more. Behind them, they left the sorcerer lord blinded, belittled, bereft of power, and vanquished by the might of faith and the help of virtuous magic. And there you go. That's the end of it. Let's see. Again, if you want to question whoever did any of the artwork in any of this, just let me know, and I'll look it up for you because I'll listen back. And that is The Secret Arts. Thank you all for watching. You have a nice day.